Greetings and welcome to the latest edition of the Entheogenic Evolution Podcast. As always, I'm your host, Martin, and I'm very happy to have you with me today. For this week's episode, we have a conversation between myself and Stefan Kerby, and we're talking about all things related to 5-MeO-DMT, and really this is in preparation for the 5-MeO-DMT facilitation course that is upcoming and being offered by Stefan's The Unchurched University. If you want more information, you can stop by at theunchurchedchurch.com/university, and you can find lists of the courses that they're offering there. And Stefan has organized this entire thing. It's starting at the very end of March. It's going to go all the way through September. I'm going to be a guest lecturer as part of this facilitation course, and we'll be speaking 1 or 2 times a month throughout that 8-month time period. For myself, it'll be starting in April, but really looking forward to it. So Stefan and I just got together, talked about 5-MeO-DMT, talked about facilitation, talked about what we're going to be doing in this course and how he's organized it. And that's the conversation that I have for you here today on the podcast. Stefan has already released this conversation on YouTube, which I've posted to my Facebook page, so maybe you've already seen it or already heard it. But here it is on the Entheogenic Evolution Podcast. But of course, we do have some announcements before we get into this great conversation with Stefan, who also has been featured a couple other times already here on the Entheogenic Evolution Podcast. So he's a return guest. First of all, thanks to Ricard, who made a donation in support of the Entheogenic Evolution Podcast over this past week via PayPal. Thank you very much for that. Also, would like to thank Karen, who signed up over at Patreon at the $5 a month level, which works out to about a $1 donation per podcast episode per month. Thank you very much, Karen. And also, big thank you to Amanda, who joined up at the cap level. And because that is $60 a month, that gets Amanda a 30-minute video call or check-in with me once a month. Also, because I'm offering this as a sign-up bonus, she is getting a free PDF copy of the AI Imagined Art illustrated version of my novel, The Solendarian Game, that I released at the 1st of January of this year. And as I've said here on the podcast, I'm making that gift available, which has a $15 retail value, available for anybody who signs up over at Patreon at the $20 a month and up level. So thank you very much, Amanda and Karen, for joining over at Patreon. I really appreciate that. And yes, if you would like to get your free PDF copy of the Solendarian Game, the AI Imagined Art illustrated version with over 600 images illustrating the entire novel from beginning to end with all of the characters and locations and all the cool stuff that happens, join up over at Patreon, patreon.com/MartinWBall. And your support is always appreciated. And of course, there's a lot that I give back as you go through those increasing tiers. And also a reminder that at the $20 a month level and up over at Patreon, you get access to the back catalog of no longer active episodes of the Entheogenic Evolution Podcast. There's well over 100 hours of materials available exclusively to my Patreon contributors at the $20 a month and up level. And of course, there is no obligation over at Patreon. You can come and go as you please. You can change your support level all the way from $1 a month to $100 a month or back down to $1 a month. It's totally up to you. You can find links to both my PayPal and Patreon at my main webpage, martinball.net, if you want to find those links or get any more information. My next big announcement, I'm really excited about this, but fundamentally, my book, 5-MeO-DMT Integration, Embodying Non-Duality is Not What You Think, Education and Empowerment for Working with the God Molecule, is ready to go. I did a little redesign on the cover. I got the proof copy last week in the mail. I have read through the entire thing, made a few little corrections here and there, and it is pretty much ready to go. So I'm officially going to launch this book later this week because we are in a leap year, and we do have February 29th this year, which of course we don't normally have. I've decided that will be a fun date to release my newest book, And so look for it on Thursday, February 29th. It'll be out in paperback and also Kindle ebook. That'll be on Amazon probably by sometime later in the day on February 29th. Also, it will be available at my Patreon shop where I have full color PDF versions of my books are available at my Patreon shop at patreon.com/Martin W. Ball. And this one will be up as of Thursday, February 29th. And like many of my books, it has a lot of my original art and photography within the book. And there will be full color images available via the PDF copy. So, yay, I'm really excited about that. This book took me about 3 weeks to write, and then I've just been editing it and working on it and reviewing it, and it's ready to go. And I think it's going to be a great contribution to the literature on 5-MeO-DMT. And of course, speaking of 5-MeO-DMT, let's go ahead and get into this conversation. Again, it's between myself and Stephen Kerby. And the upcoming course, the 5-MeO-DMT facilitation course, is an eight-month course offered through the Unchurched University. You can go to theunchurchedchurch.com/university if you want more information or if you're interested in signing up. I think there might be 1 or 2 slots left. I think the class is mostly full at this point. And anyway, here's me and Stefan talking about 5-MeO, asking each other's questions, giving information and perspectives. Hope you enjoy it. It's a great conversation. And we'll have more from the Facilitating 5-MeO-DMT anthology, of course, from the audiobook next week. So more great conversations to come after that as well. So we're just rolling right along here in the 16th year of the Entheogenic Evolution podcast. Hope you're enjoying it. Actually, no. It's actually technically the 17th year, I think, because we turned 16 years old. So now this is technically the 17th year. So I've been doing this a while. Yeah. Okay. Enjoy this conversation with Kerby.
Well, welcome again, folks. My name is Kerby. I've got with me Dr. Martin Ball. I know he just prefers Martin Ball, but we just want to welcome you to this conversation, essentially. We thought we would have just a conversation, a dialogue. We tried this once before. I made some technical errors, so we're trying this again. But the last one was extremely important, and the information was fascinating. So hopefully we will get that same flavor for you this time. So thank you again for taking some time with me.
Yeah, well, it's good to do a take two. Always happy to continue the conversation, however necessary.
Yeah, and I came up with a couple other questions last time, and I thought this would be interesting because, again, folks that are watching this or paying attention to what we're talking about right now, we're talking about 5-MeO-DMT. Martin coined the term the God molecule, and that's just what I've been referring to it as, and many other folks have been referring to it as for multiple reasons. And maybe that's a good way to start this conversation. Since you coined the term, what made you choose that phrase? That name, that title.
So I started calling it that back around 2008, 2009. And it actually, there's a lot of inspiration for why I chose that. For one, especially back at that period of time, there was so little knowledge around 5-MeO-DMT that you could talk to people about 5-MeO-DMT, and almost the universal response was people would come back and say, so you mean DMT, right? You're talking about DMT. It's like, no, this is something totally and completely different. It shares those words, but it is not DMT. And in fact, in my opinion, and now this is actually fairly widely accepted, that I don't think there's anybody that's going to argue about this at this point. But at the time, I would tell people, no, this is way more profound and powerful than DMT. And that, honestly, it just pissed people off because it's no, Terence McKenna said DMT is the strongest, so you're wrong. It's like, no, actually, Terence McKenna was really profoundly wrong about this. But anyway, even at that time, Rick Strassman's book had already been out for quite a while, DMT, quote unquote, the spirit molecule. And it was already widely known by that name. And personally, that's a name that I have never liked for DMT because it has all kinds of, it's very metaphysically loaded. It's very ontologically loaded by calling it the spirit molecule. But for one, calling 5-MeO-DMT was a nice point of reference and comparison with DMT. Say, well, okay, well, if people want to call this DMT, they want to call it the spirit molecule. This one's the God molecule. We're not talking about spirits. We're not talking about any of this intermediary realm stuff. We're talking about the full package. We're talking about the big deal. And it's also a reflection of my own personal relationship with the word God. So I was one of these people that I was raised in a secular materialist household. There was no religion. There was no spirituality. I had pursued my own path into interest in spirituality. I was one of these self-identified, quote unquote, spiritual seekers. I went on, I got my master's and my PhD in religious studies. I was deeply interested in the question of, do any of these religions have anything right, or is this all just a bunch of made up bullshit? And if there is anything right, what is it? And where can we find it? And I also like to describe myself, prior to my first 5-MeO DMT experience, that I was a philosophical non-dualist, meaning, excuse me, if you asked me, do you think all of reality is ultimately one, that's one self-contained package? And I would have said, oh yeah, absolutely. And, having studied Buddhist philosophy, I could give you all kinds of philosophical arguments about why that was the case. I'd studied Buddhism and found that it was very rational and very reasonable. It wasn't really asking me to believe a lot of things. And it said, look, this is the nature of being. This is the nature of consciousness. So I was in agreement with that at a philosophical level, and I had had some experiences that I now would refer to as non-dual light experiences with mushrooms and things like that. But with my first full 5-MeO DMT experience, as this experience is starting within a number of seconds, even before I was exhaling, it was beginning and everything was dissolving into this pure white light of consciousness and being. The very first thing that came out of my mouth as this was happening was, thank you, God. Because from my egoic perspective, the thought process was, holy shit, God is fucking real. Like, this is fucking it. Like, oh my God, this is God. And by that, I do not mean dude with a beard sitting up on the clouds telling you what's right or wrong, and let there be light, and here's my moral code that we're going to put in stone. Nothing like that. It was that, which I would now describe as the non-dual experience, that actually there's only one universal consciousness and being. And that one universal consciousness and being is everyone and everything, including this very moment and this exchange that we're having right now. This is it. This is what this God thing is. And that it was me. It was what my true nature is, that we are all actually this universal consciousness, kind of confined to these little meat suits and bodies that have a personality that develops an identity that says, hi, I'm Kerby, hi, I'm Martin, I'm Jane, I'm Jack, whoever it may be. But ultimately, it's this one universal consciousness that is performing as all the different characters of being and the different embodiments of being. So at that point, after that experience, again, the ego comes back, and I was like, holy shit, I think I just experienced God. This is a real thing, that this universal consciousness and being is a real thing, and it's what everything is. So at that point, I became super comfortable using the word God, and I would always tell people, whatever you think from your religions, I'm not talking about that. Okay, I'm not a religious person. I'm not trying to promote any given religion. So I like to call it the God molecule because I thought that was really convenient and also a little provocative. And especially, at this time in the psychedelic community, people are much more comfortable with the word God. But back then, it was always like, don't use that word. You can't say that. Don't say that. People get all pissy and get their panties in a wad about it. And I understood that because I was like that too prior to the experience. But I was like, no, actually, I'm actually looking to push some buttons here. I want to challenge people on this because there's something really uniquely profound about this molecule. And I'm not just going to let people, brush it aside. That I wanted it to be a little bit irritating in that sense.
Well, it's interesting because when you bring up religion, again, I've facilitated experiences for folks from every religion, I would assume, or a good portion of them. I hear there's 2,000, so not that many, but we've hit most of the major ones. And the difference is if it's an ayahuasca ceremony or a psilocybin ceremony, when they start experiencing or connecting with God, it is usually the God that's associated with their religion.
Right.
However, at a 5-MeO experience, when they're connecting with God, it's the same God that the Buddhist connected to, that the Muslim connected to, that the Hindu connected to, that the Christian connected to. They all are having that same God experience. It's not in a different costume. Right. And that should point out a lot to folks that, again, once the ego's offline, right, and it's just a pure, authentic version of it, all of those stories start washing away. And that told me a lot, too, as somebody that had a heavy Christian religious background, because I said the exact same thing. Thank you, God. And I still say that to this moment under the medicine. I'm like, thank you, God. So it's fascinating, but it is a different version of the God, obviously, than we thought of.
Yeah, and actually, if I could just really quickly comment on that. I always got to comment on everything. But what's really significant here that you just mentioned is that at its core, what is so profound about the 5-MeO DMT experience is that full non-dual state is absolutely universal in the sense that anyone can access it. There's nothing particularly individualistic about it once you reach that level. Now, again, when we're dealing with like psilocybin, ayahuasca, and people say, yeah, I saw God, or I saw, Mother Ayahuasca, or I saw the spirit of the mushrooms, they're talking about some kind of projection within that mental space. And so it's usually clothed and garbed in particular forms. And it's very individualistic, whereas one person says, well, it looked like this to me, and the other person says, well, it looked like that to me. And then they can disagree. It's like, well, I saw Buddha, I saw Jesus, well, I saw Muhammad. But this is this universal experience that, at least in potential, anyone can access. And pretty much everyone comes back and reports the same thing, which also is a very good indication that there's something profoundly real about this experience, because it is so universal that you can take any person on the planet, and if they are able to let go enough into the experience, which is not automatic, but if they go all the way into the depths of it, every single person comes back and says essentially the same thing.
Yeah, and that's an important piece too that you mentioned. That is its potential. But of course, everybody stepping into this space is going to have a different experience on some level for a multitude of reasons that we could have conversation about. But I think it's important sometimes, I think in the psychedelic community, it's always the love and light. It's perfect. Everything's perfect. But to me, out of all the medicines, sacraments, psychedelics, entheogens, whatever term you want to use that are being served, this one to me, I feel it requires just a higher level of care to facilitate it, for the reasons that, again, they're not completely in the space. You can't necessarily verbally communicate with them on some levels. So it just requires a different level of care. But I just like to say that because, again, some folks don't have beautiful experiences. Some folks have very difficult experiences. And then even a young lady I was working with for a year, it took about 4 or 5 experiences for her to have the God connection, right?
Yeah.
And we started calling it the spiritual car wash. I'm like, some of us just need to go through the car wash a little bit longer to get prepared for that space, whatever may be happening. But it's important to say that because I remember her level of frustration, like, I'm not meeting God. I'm not meeting God. And it's like, so it's the potential for everybody, I think. But like you said, it depends on some other factors. But out of all the common psychedelics, it has the highest propensity for that ego death experience, for sure. You brought something else up too that I think's interesting and important. The DMT concept. So I was at the Arizona Psychedelic Science Conference, and I was speaking on 5-MeO DMT, and I had my little booth, and I had 5-MeO DMT up there. 90% of the people, that's not an actual statistic, but we're using that one. 90% of the people walk by, oh yeah, I've done DMT. I'm like, 5-MeO DMT? What's the difference? And the question I always ask them, what did you see? Right? As soon as we start hearing heavy visual terms or visual experiences, we know that it's a different experience. And it's because of the receptors that 5-MeO is targeting. It's hitting the 2A receptors more than the 1A receptors. And I think that's why folks are having more of an embodied experience. It's more of a physical, energetic experience than this visual Terrence McKenna, I'm seeing the dribbling basketball elves. So it's interesting that, again, it's not as familiar for a lot of folks as I would have thought. I thought more people knew what 5-MeO was. It's more people now than previously, but there's still a learning curve, I think.
Yeah. And it's even problematized. Like I like to keep track of like articles and things that are being written or shared within popular culture or media and things like that. And, one of the access points for the 5-MeO DMT experience is the secretions of the Sonoran desert toad, and also known as the Colorado River toad. And even there, I sometimes see it written in articles, excuse me, or even in books where it says toad DMT or frog DMT. And it's no, that you are not describing it correctly. And then even reverse-wise, I've seen the pure molecule of 5-MeO DMT be described as synthetic toad venom, which it absolutely 100% is not. So there's still a lot of misappellation and misidentification that's happening within the broader culture. And so there still is a big education and learning curve around 5-MeO. And just to really sort of put this point home, that it's important to keep in mind that people who have even had experiences with DMT, when they finally do get an experience with 5-MeO DMT, they tend to be shocked, amazed, and astounded. So it's really important not to mix them up, that these are so profoundly different. And then you and I, being people who have experienced these things, we can actually ask someone, like they say, well, I don't know if I took DMT or 5-MeO DMT. And we can ask, okay, well, tell me about your experience. And you can tell just by the description what it was. 100%. I mean, it's obvious. There's never a question. There's like, well, that might have been 5-MeO. It's either it was 5-MeO or it was something else, unquestionably.
Right. Yeah, there's no mistake. And back to the title, again, at that conference, Hamilton Morris was there. And he's got obviously a number of good videos out. One he has on the history of the Sonoran desert toad. Great. He's got a couple in a series where he thought he found the guy that created the pamphlet. The guy was a fraud, found out the real guy. But it's a fascinating history of the toad itself, because from my standpoint, that was my original, medicine, so to speak. That was my original sacrament, learning to serve the toad. And it is a different process, similar but a different process. But now we're really trying to, most of my talks now are really trying to encourage folks away from that. It's just under immense amount of pressure environmentally. Anytime we have an opportunity to commoditize things, we tend to do it and then just abuse it. And unfortunately, that's what's happened with that one. But it gets confusing because 5-MeO technically in the term is 5-MeO is also an NN dimethyltryptamine. So a lot of folks are NN dimethyltryptamine. They're both NNs. But anyway, Hamilton Morris has a great blip on what to actually call it. Nobody's listening. We're all going to keep calling it 5-MeO DMT. And then a lot of folks call NN or traditional DMT. But you hit a good point. They couldn't be more drastically different. They're not even in the same world. And I think that term, the God molecule, is perfectly coined, especially if we're going to call traditional DMT the spirit molecule. So it's actually the perfect title for it. So well done.
Yeah, thank you. And also, let's just point out that there are other more complex compounds than DMT that also have DMT in the word or in the name of the molecule. So it really just shows a level of ignorance. Like if we're talking about psilocybin, that's 4-HO-DMT. Okay, but that's not DMT, right? And if we get to bufotenine, which is also part of toad secretions, that's 5-HO-DMT. That is not DMT. It's something different. This is kind of basic chemical knowledge that you might think that people in this psychedelic community would be more aware of, and that know that every atom that you add to a molecule changes it, makes it something different. I mean, this is what chemistry is. There's an entire science there. It's called chemistry. And we have different elements, and those different elements combine in different ways, and they make different molecules, and those different molecules produce different effects at a biological level. That's just basic biochemistry. And I'm not a chemist. I can't tell you all the ins and outs. I mean, we could get my dad on here, who is a chemist, and he could tell us like what it all really means at the chemical level. But chemicals they're not identical just because they share a couple letters. That doesn't mean that much. Yeah.
Know what you're taking is the lesson, and don't expect your facilitator to be a chemist.
Yeah.
They're probably not, but yeah, they're completely different experiences, and they need to be facilitated, obviously in different manners. But I want to ask you a question, and if you don't want to answer this, we can cut this out. I'm curious about your first opportunity as a facilitator. Now, obviously, what we're trying to do on this chat is explain to folks what's coming up as far as the class. We've got the 5-MeO facilitator class starting in March. It's 6 months long. We've got a few more spots left. But the importance of this class is the reason that we're having this conversation, the importance of how folks can step into this safely, how to do it correctly, and how to prevent being more traumatized if you're coming in with trauma already. But that being said, I've always been curious if you're willing to share your first experience. The details, fine, but I'm equally as interested in what it felt like you from an experiential standpoint. What was going through your mind? What was that process like?
Yeah, well, it all kind of came about very organically in a sense. So I went through my own process of what I like to call non-dual energetic reconditioning and reformatting that was kick-started by my very first 5-MeO DMT experience. And then I was kind of in that process for the next roughly year and a quarter. And during that time period, I was going to the local Santo Daime church, drinking a lot of ayahuasca, returning to the Temple of Awakening Divinity where I was served 5-MeO DMT, and I did that once a month or every 2 months. So over this time period of about a year and a quarter, that was deeply, deeply transformative for me. I did maybe 10 to 12 experiences with 5-MeO DMT, a lot more with ayahuasca, which I would primarily characterize as energetic processing. So in other words, I don't have a lot to tell you about what I saw or what insights or, that wasn't what it was about for me. It was like this deep energetic processing that was taking place. And then all of that reached a point of conclusion where there was just this fundamental breakthrough and transformation that took place. And at that point, there was kind of a quote-unquote new me that was operating. That was very different from my prior operating system, that it had been upgraded, defragmented, and enhanced in various ways. And at that point, I was with my wife, Jessalyn, and she also had been undergoing part of this process for herself, but she had not really reached the point. She was struggling and resisting it much more than I had been. And so then there was kind of this weird situation where I've kind of popped into this new sort of energy man land that was very freely accessible to me. And she was kind of like, what the hell's going on? So we actually started working together with DMT. That's what we had at the time. I didn't have any access to 5-MeO. And when we started taking DMT together, and that's actually where my sort of intuitive, energetic senses kind of got aligned with, okay, well, we need to position ourselves in this kind of way, that these energetic structures are very important. And then if we're actually working together, that there are these various interchanges and exchanges of energy between us, and it's very much a combined process. And also learned about working with various sounds and tones and all different kinds of verbalizations to kind of help accent and propel the experience along. So all of that was going on with my wife. And then right around this same time, I actually had a number of people who were contacting me about wanting to work with Salvia divinorum, which was something that I had also done a lot of work with at that point. And so people were coming over for Salvia divinorum. And then also I had developed this way of working energetically with an eagle feather. And so people were saying, hey, I want to get feathers. Like, okay, well, come on over and we'll do it. And even that was pretty profound. But then towards, I think it was probably the end of the summer of 2009, I finally found a source for 5-MeO DMT. And I ordered some online, and it showed up in my mailbox. And it was super easy and super cheap. And at that point, then some of the local people who had done either feathering sessions with me or salvia sessions, they asked, well, could I come experience 5-MeO with you? And even from that start, I said, okay, well, just understand that I actually know that I'm not just facilitating an experience, but I'm actually very interested in working with people in that state energetically, and that my method of doing that is that I'm consuming it with you. And so I kind of set out the guidelines. And so my method of facilitation is very different from what anybody else is really doing. And that's also, it's not really what we're focusing on in the class. The energetics of that are still very important, but we are going to be looking at kind of this idea of what is just basic facilitation, like where are we starting from? What are their concerns? And this I would consider a far more advanced practice. But anyway, within that, I don't actually remember like who the first person was or how that went. I do remember a very early one, but I'm not sure if it was the first one. But then at that point, it was all just word of mouth, where I always kind of set it up with, I am never going to invite anyone to come take medicine with me. I'm never going to encourage anyone to take medicine with me. I'm not going to try and find clients. I'm not going to go out and try and convince anyone. But if somebody asks me, and if once I tell them, okay, this is how I work, if they say, yes, I'd like to do that, then we'll make this happen. But I will show just then one story. This was very, very early on, so it might have been within the realm of somewhere within the first person, but somewhere in there. So at that time, I didn't have like a room to do it in other than like the living room in the house that we were living in. And I would put a mat on the floor for someone, and then behind the person's head was the fireplace. And so I had somebody come over. Again, this was very, very early on, somewhere in the range of firsts, but not entirely certain. And this person, took their hit, and everything was going great. And then the person was lying down, and then this noise intruded. And this noise was like this metallic, like a jackhammer sound. And I was just like, oh my God, this is terrible. This is totally going to ruin this person's experience. And it was coming through the fireplace. And so the person's head was right there, and this is like this metallic. So I go outside, and then there's a metal cover on the top of the chimney, and there's a woodpecker up there, and it's just banging on the metal. It just like, and I'm thinking, oh my God, this is going to ruin this person's experience. Like, do I need to get the hose and like try and chase off this woodpecker? I'm having all this anxiety around like this is ruining their experience. But eventually the woodpecker went away, and I came back inside, and I kept working with the person. And then eventually the guy sat up, and then he started to tell me about what his experience had been. And then he said, and then when you started playing that metal drum and you were banging on that, he said, that just propelled me into a whole new level of my experience. And that was like it was so perfect at just the right time. And that's one of the places where I really learned like, oh, so I might have my ideas of what I think is supposed to take place or what's ideal or not ideal, but actually you can trust that the whole system is organizing the experience, and that the more we let go and don't try and control and just focus on what needs to be attended to right here, the more you're actually going to be able to allow the process to unfold without any specific direction or interference. So that was a very important lesson for me early on.
That's a good story. Even the build up, just kind of your background with it. And it's important for folks to understand that look, a lot of the folks that are facilitating or facilitated really was learning by trial and error. So a lot of the pioneers of this is like, what do we do, right? Let's figure this out. This isn't ayahuasca where we've had several thousand years to kind of master this and, create this system. So the system's been being created, and it's been created by folks like you and some other folks. And I'll toss my hat in there that we're continuously trying to create and fine tune the system, because ultimately, you nailed it. We don't know everything that's happening. We've got our theories, we've got our thoughts around it. But when somebody's in this experience, we only know so much about it. So it is a trial and error process. And I think that's important. I mean, my very first one, I do remember my first one. I served a friend of mine, same thing. I'm like, look, I'm just trying to figure this out a little bit. And he was trying to figure it out. So we said, okay, mutual destruction, right? I'll serve you, you serve me, and we'll figure this out together. And it was beautiful. And I served him. And immediately, we were outside in Florida. It was beautiful. And he just rolled over and started screaming at the top of his lungs, like the top of your lungs.
Yeah.
Bloody murder, just looking me in my eyes, his eyes open, and just, ah! And I thought, oh, we're in trouble. Right?
I've done it now.
Yes, we're in this now. And all you can do is be in the moment, keep him safe. And I remember the necklace I had at this time was like a metal beaded necklace, and it was super sturdy. And I remember leaning down over him and him grabbing the necklace.
Oh, yeah.
And I'm thinking, I'm not going out like this. I've got to get this necklace off me somehow. So I was able to get the necklace off. A neighbor pulled up, right? Is everything okay? I'm like, everything's fine. Anyhow, it's a funny story to me now, because I learned probably 6 different things to not do in one event. And that's the importance of, again, the training and learning these stories. We could talk about them and share them lightly. I've got several of them. But the point is to help people avoid some of these pitfalls and some of these obstacles that are now, to me, very easy to avoid, and make this a significantly smoother experience for people.
Yeah.
But it was rough.
And, another point that I'd like to make about this, for when I started facilitating, what I didn't mention that is very, very significant is that not only had I gone back to the Temple of Awakening Divinity 10 to 12 times and had my own process and experience with it, and also attending the Santo Daime Church during that time period and seeing lots of people processing ayahuasca and looking at it all through this lens of what I was learning about the non-dual nature of energetic embodiment versus the egoic nature of energetic embodiment and processing and expression. So that was a very, very deep learning period for me. But in going to the Temple of Awakening Divinity, not only was I having my experiences, but the person who was running these ceremonies, or circles, as he called them, it was usually between 5 to 7 people. And each person is individually getting a turn with the medicine, and then everybody else is witnessing and holding space. And so over that time period, I'd had the opportunity to see many different people experience 5-MeO DMT, and also very clearly, as we've kind of been talking about, noticing that, their experience is very different from mine. Like from my first experience, and this is something we've talked about before, that with my first experience, it was so effortless, it was so easy, it was so overwhelmingly positive and profound. My mistaken notion was, it just does this. Like, this could not be simpler. It just does this, and it's the most amazing experience of my life. But then as I got to observe other people, I realized, actually, there's all kinds of ways that people might resist. There's ways that people might need to process either conscious or unconscious material, kind of the washing machine thing, before they get to that experience that I had. And there's some people who get there right away, but then as they're coming out of it, they have these tremendous struggles that are taking place. And so getting to see all of that, and then really understand it's not the same for everyone. There's a wide spectrum of different kinds of reactions that are taking place. And I think it's one of the biggest problems that we have in the 5-MeO DMT community is somebody that, like me or like you, has a very positive experience and then says, this is so easy, I want to start serving this to other people, but they're not yet fully educated about what's really going on and what the potential is. And that it's always important to emphasize that though this is a minority of cases, some people have tremendous difficulty processing the experience and then also working through the integration period afterwards. So it can be traumatic for people. It can be destabilizing. And again, that's why it's good to call it the God molecule, so that it's kind of saying like, look, dude, do not be casual about this. You think you're ready to meet God? And the way I like to put it is, are you ready to encounter yourself as God? Because that's even more of a mind fuck. That's even more of an ego twister, to put it that way. To really tell people, like, you're dealing with the biggest energy possible here. You can't get any bigger than this. No. So please tread carefully.
Well, I love how you stated that, and that's probably one of the most important pieces we've brought up. Again, I love having these conversations with you. We've had beautiful experiences. We've had the honor and opportunity to see other people have life-changing experiences, and literally changed my life, changed the life of so many around me. And we had this conversation before. My first experience wasn't that easy. It was almost overwhelming, and it scared me straight, so to speak, where I had no interest in it. And very similar story, I was in the middle of doing ayahuasca every month, and I started doing this, and it took about 6 months, maybe 8 months to a year. And I like what you said, just totally a different person, right? I mean, and it's almost difficult for people to grasp how much you can shift and change in a period of time. But not everybody's prepared for that shift and change in that speed of time. So, the point, I speak to a lot of folks that I've served, and that's why we started this whole class, to just kind of pin that down when folks are like, why are you starting a 5MEO facilitation course? Well, I've not had a ceremony that I could think of where afterwards somebody didn't ask me, how do they do what I'm doing?
Right.
And I've never had a good answer for them. And then what's happened is these folks will go out on their own and very similar, like, well, I'll just get some medicine and I will figure this out. And that just, it's scary. And we have more resources now than when we were starting, right? There's plenty of resources such as this resource. And if you've had a simple experience, or you just laid there like little Buddha, your point is not everybody does that.
Yeah.
And I had a gentleman that I've had conversation with. Same thing. He had one experience with the medicine and he was now serving it. I wasn't comfortable with it. He called me a few weeks later and said, I had this guy flip around and freak out on the floor. That's unusual. And it's like, actually, that's very common, not unusual. And you would know that if you had the experience. So the question is, how do you keep those people safe? And what I don't want to do is create scares by telling all the horror stories. But I could tell stories, probably same as you, that if you're not prepared for that, you are taking people's lives into your hand, and it's a hefty responsibility. I mean, before I got on this call, I was speaking with a friend of mine that's a psilocybin facilitator that's going to join the class, and we're having the conversation. The difference is, if you're under psilocybin, I could say, Martin, just take a deep breath.
Right.
Okay, you're breathing. You're here. You're safe. It's psychologically, we need to help soften it and ground and work with you and keep you safe in that manner. Under 5MEO, they can't hear you. There's nobody to say to take a different. So you are fully responsible for those people's safety. And it's something I take extremely seriously, and anybody stepping into this space should, because it's not just the physical safety, but we can shift into, again, not everybody is ready to have that experience. A lot of people won't be able to land that experience, and you could really disrupt people's lives. I mean, you and I have talked to a person I think we both may be working with that had a ceremony 2 years ago, and he's been just depressed and anxious ever since. First ceremony went fine. He took another ceremony, and that just completely threw him into a dark area, and he's been there ever since. This isn't an uncommon story. So anyhow, that's why we're having this class. It's safety first. We want to train people to be trauma-informed, entheogenic guides, understand what you're doing in the space, understand the medicine, start creating a relationship with the medicine. And that's something that we both have said we did. We were working with the medicine before I even thought about serving somebody.
Yeah.
Why would I give it to you if I don't even understand it, right? You need to understand everything you can about that molecule before you start putting in other people's laps. So that's the point of the course.
And Kerby, I'd really love to return to this point that you've mentioned a few times now, and I think that it deserves a little bit more airtime to really make the distinction, because we're also in a place now where people are able to go to like psilocybin facilitator training or MDMA training or ketamine training, that all of those are out there and available.
Yeah.
But part of what we're doing in putting together a course around 5-MeO-DMT is that someone might think, well, I've gone through my training program with psilocybin, so I know how to facilitate a psychedelic experience. And again, 5-MeO-DMT is different. It is profoundly different, because what happens, because what we're dealing with here is the full potential of the non-dual experience, where there is no subject there during that time period. And then there's all kinds of levels and gradations in between egoic awareness and full non-dual absorption. And a lot of that also is processed and expressed and embodied in an unconscious manner. So again, the difference, like if somebody's having a really tough time on psilocybin, you can talk to them. You can say, hey, do you want to go outside? Do you want to go look at the trees for a few minutes? You can interact with them. And usually with most other psychedelics, not always, but in most other situations, it's more contained within the person, whatever it is that they're experiencing. They're not necessarily acting it out. But when we're dealing with 5-MeO-DMT, people go into periods where either their ego is fully dissolved and is not present, and their body may be doing something that they're not aware of, or there are other situations where the conscious parts of the ego effectively go offline, but now there are unconscious parts of the ego that are acting out. So this is kind of similar to if somebody is in a completely deep state of sleep, you could say, hey, Kerby, wake up. If you're in deep sleep, there's no ego there, so there's no registering that somebody's talking to you. Okay, so that's kind of like in the full non-dual experience. And then we also have the situation where you have people who are sleepwalkers, and they're walking around and they're doing stuff. They're making themselves a sandwich, and they're maybe talking to you, but consciously, that person does not know what they're doing. They don't know what they're engaged in. Now, it gets even worse if we think about in that state. So that's where people might be acting out something unconscious on a 5-MeO experience. There's also the possibility that they could be in a deeply projecting state where their mind is projecting all kinds of realities that aren't actually taking place, but then they're acting on it, but they don't know it. They don't know what they're doing, and there's no cut through. You can't break in because the conscious part of their ego is not present. It's dissolved during that time period. So there's all kinds of phenomenon that take place in a 5-MeO experience, or at least potentially within a 5-MeO experience, that no matter how much somebody takes of another psychedelic, you're not going to see these kinds of things taking place.
No,
and so, and this goes back to this guy that you mentioned who he took it once and then said, oh, I want to serve people. And then he had somebody who's rolling around the floor. Well, that's the unconscious part of the ego that's acting out. And he says, oh, I've never seen it before. But like you and I know, totally normal. Not everybody does that, but it's also totally normal. And then there's, like you mentioned, the person reaching up and grabbing the necklace around your neck. That's another thing where people do act out. Sometimes they do reach out to their facilitator, and there might be some kind of violent projection that they're going through. There might be kind of a deeply sexual projection that they're going through, or it might even be a deeply religious projection where they're looking at you and like, you're Jesus or something like that, right? And all of this stuff is taking place and people don't know that they're doing it.
Yeah.
But this is a part of the 5-MeO experience. We need to learn about what this is and also how to deal with it when it arises.
Yeah, and you know, to me, I try to break it down in a couple pieces, right? Folks are like, well, what is the experience? And again, we'll go through this in the class and breaking it down. And I think the beauty of us having conversations and some of the other folks that are working with the classes, we may not agree on everything because we don't know everything. So it's okay to have opinions and thoughts, and there's different techniques and strategies, and that's the beauty. I'm excited to hear other people's thoughts on it, but we're in agreement in all this area in the sense that I think the first piece that is happening once you inhale, for most folks, the facilitator is going to start pixelating, and then if you get the full dose and you're offline, you're offline. And at that stage, what is, in my opinion, what is happening is the most powerful, energetic, somatic release a human could have. And the analogy I've used several times, I think it's for most humans, it's the first time in their lives their body is relaxed enough, the ego is shut down, they're able to get back into a state of homeostasis. Their body's vibrating, all this old adrenaline, all the trauma, all the depression, all that. If everything's an energetic pattern, well, where'd it go? Well, you just shoved it down, and it's like we're garbage compressors and we're tapped out. Yeah. In that experience, you will start seeing people move that energy. Even if they lay there like little Buddhas, you can watch the physical vibrations, the somatic release happening.
Right.
And that's where you and I find is like, as somebody that's done Reiki for years, I stopped doing Reiki outside of the space because to me, in the space, they're primed for energy work if that's the stage you're going to do, because they're already having this full energetic release.
Right.
So that's a part of the experience that we don't talk about a lot, right? It's always, I met God, I had an ego death, I had this, that was incredible. But that piece alone, so even folks that maybe don't have the full experience, it's important for them to understand you for sure had an energetic release that you probably would have never been able to get elsewhere, because I still do the medicine a couple times a year purely for that energetic release. And mine's always heavy laughter or heavy tears, but that's just this heavy energy that's moving. So that's an important part of the process that most folks aren't talking about. But going from that somatic release to the first moment of being back online, folks don't even recognize that somatic release would happen, but a lot of folks will report, well, I feel lighter, I feel different. Yeah, you just moved a lot of energy that you've been shoving down for the last 40 years. Must feel nice. So, but that's an important piece of the process.
Yeah. So I want to add my own emphasis on that, because this is another point where it's good to make a distinction with other modalities of quote unquote psychedelic therapy and things like that. So if you go in for ketamine, MDMA, or psilocybin, what the facilitator is going to do is say, okay, well, we want you to just close your eyes and relax and just go with your experience. And if you need to express some emotions, but just keep coming back into your internal state. And what we're going to do is we're going to have a nice bed for you here, and we're going to lie down, and we're going to put a blanket on you, and we're going to put some eye shades on you, and then we're going to watch you for the next 5 hours or whatever it is. Okay? And that works really well in those contexts, because people are having their inner experience, they're having their insights and revelations, and they're sorting through their emotional responses and all of that. But again, when we're dealing with 5-MeO-DMT, the main issue is that this is a fully embodied energetic experience and process. So the attention to the somatics of it is primary. And as you say, some people will just lie there and then they sit up and they say, that was amazing. But honestly, most people are not going to just lie there. There's going to be all kinds of activity taking place within their bodies, and this is coupled with all kinds of emotional processing and expression. It might be accompanied by various forms of purging and releasing, which can be energetic and gagging, or just flood loads. It could be laughing, crying, flooding, vomit, and it can also be these profound full body orgasms that people are experiencing, and all these vibrations and tremors and spontaneous movements that are arising. So it is anything but you're just going to lie down for the next few hours and have your experience and come back feeling better. It's like, no, like your phrase of the cosmic washing machine. It's like, you're going to go through the washing machine. And if you've got a lot of garbage, not as a judgment call, but just realistically, if you've been through a lot of trauma, if you've had a lot of emotional repression, if you have felt unable to authentically be yourself within your life, and you're constantly compromising for other people or society, you're going to have shit that's going to have to process. And the way it's going to do it is in your body. It's not just about, I had an insight and now I feel better. It's actually, I felt all of that garbage coming through me, and like the whole universe was turning inside out, and it was cleansing me at this level that I never thought possible. Yeah.
I guess what was coming to my mind is I just wanted to share, like we talk about all the different angles, and I know sometimes when I have conversations about this and the facilitation of it, sometimes I get a little serious in the sense just because I do think it's such a serious process, and could be some negative ramifications for folks, and that's just important to let everybody know it's not for everybody, but the folks that it is for, like what it did for me, and that's so you asked me last time why this class, the amount of passion I have for what this molecule, this medicine did for me in my life, I couldn't even express. We don't have enough time to express it, but I just remember the first opportunity in my life where when I was coming out, I'm like, oh, that's what meditators have been doing. And I meditated for a decade, didn't quite get it until I got it. And then I'm like, oh.
Yeah.
And then these little energetic pauses, right? So I think what's happening, the analogy I use for folks, it's like the old devil and the angel analogy, and the ego's not the devil, but let's just play that analogy. It's been calling the shots for most of the time, right? And it was the next day I remember driving to work and somebody cut me off. The old reaction was to get upset about it. And I could feel an immediate surge in my body. Same as always, the same physical reaction of tension that I in the past labeled as being angry. But there was this pause. Boom. Oh, your body's reacting to what that person did. It didn't say you're angry. And it was the first time in my life I realized that these physical reactions are programmed reactions. He cut me off. My body's already reacting before I've even put any thought to it. Right. So there's no way I'm going to prevent that thought by having a thought of like, don't get angry when he does that. It's already happened in the body. The body labeled it. So that mixing with the first time in my life that I was able to actually just be. And what I mean by that is hyperactive ADHD my whole life, but to be able to actually sit still and be, just be, no thoughts. I don't think we talk enough about that. I have a lot of friends, we're in the spiritual community, we're doing all these different modalities. If we're not teaching people to have control over their mind, right, to settle their thoughts, to have some understanding that your mind is thinking constantly and those thoughts have emotions tied to them and you're experiencing those emotions and it's the same thoughts you had yesterday, that's a program. So if you have no control over your mind, none of this work is going to do anything. Go to all the Aya ceremonies you want, not going to fix you. So we don't talk enough about that. And to me, this molecule, there's nothing that can provide that level of consciousness. And so to me, what happened is the angel part popped up, my more authentic self, my consciousness. Yeah. So now when the guy cut me off, instead of this guy calling the shots, it's like, hold on, are we angry? Are we? Or is that just how we reacted? So I've said in the past, I think free will is a myth, but I think you obtain free will or some level of it through being more conscious. And to me, there is nothing more powerful in its ability or power to increase your level of consciousness than this medicine. And that's how it saved me, and it saved a lot of the folks around me. So it is an important tool. When used properly, it can change so much. And the potential and opportunity for it to be used to change things for good is on another level. It just needs to be done right and needs to be handled with care. That amount of change so rapidly needs to be handled with care, right? The other medicines, it's a different process. So anyhow, this can be a game changer for the people that it's right for.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So I would just want to ask you now in our little back and forth, since we are talking about the class, that I'm just curious for you to share what inspired you. Now, obviously, both of us were quite enamored with 5-MeO, DMT. You have devoted yourself to it in your way, and I've devoted myself to it in my way. I mean, pretty much everything I've been doing since 2008 has been around 5-MeO, DMT. I'm working now what I think is probably my 10th book on the subject is what I'm doing currently. You haven't written a book yet. I hope you do at some point, but I know you've been designing other classes. You've also gotten into doing some public speaking. You run the Unchurch, so you're involved in a lot of different things. But what was your impetus for wanting to actually put together a class around facilitation beyond the fact that people are asking, how can I do this? And you've been able to see that there's a need for it. Why put it together and do it?
Yeah, I think a number of factors we've already touched on. Obviously, safety is important. I think you just heard it in what I said, how special this is to me, but the importance of safety in it, because it is so unique that, as you mentioned earlier, people could have good experiences and with the best intentions step in, right, and realize they stepped in over their head. So I want to give folks an opportunity where they can learn this medicine. But it's also because it is such an important molecule. I've served a number of different entheogens. I've been around folks that have taken a number of different entheogens, but there is nothing. There's the reports back from folks that have 5-MeO experiences. They're just significantly different than the person that went to a psilocybin. Oh, I did psilocybin this weekend. That's beautiful. I'm sure it was healing, and I don't want to diminish that. But those reports are significantly different than the folks that are coming back from a 5-MeO experience. So it's just different. And I think people need to understand it. It's still fairly new. Like I said, unlike ayahuasca, the traditional, or historical use of it is up for debate, right? Some folks think it's so many thousand years and how many groups had it, but it's still in debate. And I don't get involved in that. I understand that 5-MeO is in yopo seeds, and there's a number of other plants and items that have 5-MeO in it. But I'm talking the modern era, Albert Most and the folks from the 80s, from toad venom to now. It's a new space still. And what I'm seeing out there right now in the traditional facilitation of it, and traditional, I mean the last 20 to 30 years, it needs to evolve. They're not evolving. And I was one of those folks, and I mean that with complete compassion, that we're still doing it the way that we did it, and it could be done better. And I think that's an important piece. But to finalize it, I just love this medicine. I love talking about it. I love sharing it with people. I love facilitating it with people. I love it being facilitated to me. I love explaining it. Like you nailed it. I'm just enamored with it, and I want more people to understand what's happening with it. And especially because I think, unlike some of the other molecules, you brought up the MDMA, the psilocybin, the ketamine. Like, we've got a class on that. We call it the big three. It's for the therapist, because that's going to be for them to be able to use, so they should understand that one. My concern is this one's never going to be, or no time soon do I see it being used in a therapeutic setting in a legal fashion, like some of these other medicines. So it's always going to have an underground, I think, or at least for the foreseeable future. And that means we need to protect people stepping into that underground, and we just need better trained people. Yeah.
And, even just talking about how relatively recent and new this is, that, when we're dealing with yopo, that's ultimately, it's a different experience, because that's something that's snorted. Yes, there is 5-MeO DMT in it, but it's not anywhere near the same as smoking or vaporizing 5-MeO DMT. And that even so, in terms of like actual use of like toad secretions, the earliest reports we have goes back to like Albert Most. Actually, his name is Ken Nelson. Albert Most is a pseudonym. And he wrote this the toad pamphlet, the psychedelic toad of the Sonoran Desert. And that was in like 1984. And actually, I was looking at that for the book that I'm writing right now, because I have like a kind of a current history of 5-MeO DMT. And something that really stood out to me in reading that pamphlet is that he said, you take a bit of toad secretions that is about the size of a match head, and then cut that up with a razor blade and vaporize that. And then he says, and then you have about a 2 to 5 minute experience. And so one thing that really stood out right away, looking at that pamphlet, was, people are using far larger doses today than what he's talking about. So even though that was the beginnings of the use of toad secretions, it's changed a lot even since then. And so now we're, when people are serving anywhere from 50 to 100 milligrams of toad secretions, that's a lot more than a match head. That's way, way more than a match head. So this is part of the education process, is like, well, what are the different dosages? What do they achieve? And also, there is an emphasis on larger doses, and there's a reason for that.
Yeah,
and the reason is because the ego is so energetically resilient that it actually takes a lot to get it out of the way for these deeper processes to arise and to take place within the individual. And you're not going to get it with a match head.
No, and that's a great point. I mean, part of the emphasis of the class is obviously going to be dosing, but with the pure molecule or synthetic, whatever term I like calling it, the pure molecule antode, even though I would like people to shift away from that, that's still what's being used on some front. So it's important just to at least understand that. But to your point, yeah, I think, and I have nothing but love for everybody out there trying to do this work honorably, right? But I think I jokingly say, and maybe I should follow my own advice sometimes, I'm like, some of these guys need to do some more medicine, right? It's like we let our egos get in the way. It's like, this is how I've been doing it, and this is the way it should be done. And I'm constantly reassessing and reevaluating and readjusting to what I think is a better way of doing it. I think we need to be open to that. And the dosing has been a big piece. A lot of folks will talk about like the handhold, the hug, and the kiss, right? So for folks that are unfamiliar with that, that's a titration schedule, a titration model when you're sitting in front of the potentially facilitating somebody, where you give them a small dose, which would be the handhold, just to see how they react, and a hug, and then a kiss if that feels appropriate. And I think that's the right model. In the past, I didn't appreciate that model as much, because I felt what would happen sometimes is the handhold or the hug would scare them from the kiss, without them really understanding that the kiss is actually an easier experience because you're not there. You don't have to navigate it as much. But now I've kind of come to the conclusion that's okay. If that scares them from that, then maybe they would have a difficulty landing that. So the dosing for me, has dropped tremendously since when I was trained. We were trained on 90. I mean, so when I was with the traveling group, we would show up with 90s for everybody. Right? Doesn't matter who it was. And that's, to me, I've got issues with that too. I mean, you got to have some sort of uniformity, but if you do a good intake, are you sensitive to medicines? And there's some things that you could ask to really try to fine tune the dose to some level. But to your point, 90 could just be too much for some folks. And then you have folks that are having whiteout experiences where they just don't remember anything because it was potentially too much medicine. So the goal to me is like, what's the minimum amount you need to have the full experience that you're looking for? I mean, that's the dose you want. Any more than that, obviously, is a waste, and less than that may not get to the experience. But you realize that when you create a relationship with your medicine, right? So if you're sitting in front of somebody, I know what 20 is going to do to them. I know what 40, 50, 60, 70, 80, I know what it's going to do to them to some degree, right? Not just for myself, but I've experienced it with 1,000 people. That's important. But again, that relationship with your medicine will really dictate that dosing protocol. But to your point, there's a lot of medicine being served. There's heavy doses being served that I just don't know if are necessary.
Yeah. So in getting back to the class, you're the primary organizer for the class, and I was sort of a consultant on designing the curriculum to some degree, but it's really, you're the one who's put in all the work and doing all this. So how is the class going to actually work? I mean, that's always the question of like, okay, well, it's a class. What does that mean?
Beautiful. Yeah, it's if you haven't taken a class with Unchurched yet, we use the Kajabi platform. So it's an actual online platform where we'll have online curriculum. We're almost completed the Facilitator guide manual. It's going to be a 70 to 80 page document like this. It's an actual manual that you could print out and have. So that'll be in the on the page here shortly. The class starts March 24th. The plan of the class is each Sunday from 6 to 8 Central Time. We're going to have the live class. That class will be recorded. So if you're unable to attend one of the classes, that's okay. I mean, in 6 months, we assume some folks aren't going to be able to make all the classes, but again, you'll be able to have access to it almost immediately after class by going back into your online platform and watching the video. So it starts March 24th, and that's going to go all the way till September 10th. And September 10th through 17th, we're going to meet in Colorado for a 1 week in-person experiential, where you'll experience the medicine, you'll serve the medicine, you'll start creating a relationship with your medicine if you don't have one. If you do, you'll deepen it. And to me, this is one of the most important pieces of it. I mean, the online curriculum, again, we've got you, we've got some other great teachers, facilitators, shamans here. We've got a great crew of people They're going to share their techniques, how they do it, their thoughts on it, which I'm open to, again, diverse perspectives. But really, you have to be in the space and get your hands on it. You got to touch it. You got to watch it. So the way I envision the classes each week, we'd like to watch a video, or most of the weeks. I want folks to see processes. So I've got a few that I've done. I've got a few that I've been involved in, some good ones, some bad ones that have been facilitated to me. And then the web is full of them that we've been downloading and saving. So we can watch these experiences and start critiquing them. I think the importance of noticing something going wrong early is important. It's just, that's where you'll get some experience. This doesn't look right. What do we do? And so to me, just that visual component is going to be extremely important. It's a small group. We're going to create a beautiful community. And at the end of this course, we want to have trauma-informed 5-MeO facilitators. Trauma-informed is a word that's being tossed around, but legit portion of this curriculum is about that aspect of it. And in closing, to your point that you touched on at the very beginning of the conversation, and same as me, if you ask me, the most important aspect of this is the personal transformation. And I know groups always say that, personal transformation in the class.
Yeah.
If nothing else happened to me, but what happened to me in the transformation of becoming a facilitator has changed my life. It is what helped me, right? Not necessarily becoming a facilitator, but that self-work. Right. And to me, the class is 6 months of self-work. You should be a different person at the end of it. Not that you're not an amazing person now, but we're going to talk about ego. We're going to talk about how you're showing up, why you wear what you wear, right? All of these things to create just better versions of ourselves, because I think the facilitator is a massive piece of the set and setting, and we need to understand that and prepare ourselves and be that piece. So March 24th, the class starts. We've got a few more spots. Love to have some folks.
Yeah. So where do people go to sign up?
Yeah, we'll put the link below, or you can go to the unchurchedchurch.com, click on the Unchurched University, and follow the link to the 5-MeO facilitator course. Or again, I'll put my contact information below. It's important if you have an interest, you have questions, just reach out. I'll answer your questions. But it's going to be once in a lifetime. I'm excited for this.
Yeah, and I'm looking forward to it as well. That I've never officially taught a course on facilitating 5-MeO DMT. I have worked for a number of people who facilitate with this molecule, both Toad and with the pure molecule. I do one-on-one consultations with people where they come and they say, okay, here's my practice, or here's what I'm doing, or here's what I saw someone experiencing, and giving people feedback and helping people fine-tune. Yeah. But this is the first time that I've jumped in at this level, but I've been calling the adjunct professor to come in and actually teach some of these classes and share my perspective on what's going on and what it is that we need to know. So I'm definitely very excited about it.
Well, and that's how we met. And again, yeah. I've never had any issue with that. Again, I've been one that constantly looking for information, right? Constantly. If you know something I don't know, I want to know it. I've never thought I've had all the answers. I think I'm pretty decent at what I do. But I'm always open to new information. And I think that part is important. We're creating this community where you're going to be reaching out to other classmates. You're looking for advice, or maybe it's a referral situation. But to have a community of other facilitators that you can communicate with without ego, right? Where we're all working together in some essence, it's going to make a world of difference, and it's going to be life-changing. And to close your point back to why the class, my vision would be to have facilitators all over the country, all over the world, that are highly trained and qualified to facilitate this medicine, where folks don't have to, go out of their way and be stuck with somebody maybe that isn't as qualified. So it's a lot of work ahead of us, but I'm excited.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to it too.
All right. Well, I appreciate you taking some time.
Yeah.